I'm gonna be honest, I don't enjoy the Space Wolves aesthetic, but I do like Vikings. So I set myself to reimagine these Space Marines with the use of historical as well as mythological elements, and of course, in the Grimdark style. In this video, I will focus on showing you how to paint a classic Space Wolf armor scheme with an insane variation of color and microtexture, utilizing a simple technique of isopropyl alcohol that anyone can do. What isopropyl alcohol will let us do is to use Reductive technique on acrylics, literally destroying paint layers. So what we will do first is painting everything bottom to top in several layers, and then uncovering it back down with isopropyl alcohol. But before starting to paint the model itself, I'll first get this piece of cut plastic art to try the scheme on. This serves as a test piece for trying out the recipe. I could also use a spare marine I have laying around instead, or any other part of a model, but I feel showing off the individual steps on a simple flat shape might work better for understanding what exactly is happening and how to do it. Let us know if that's something that helps you out. Beginning with the main grey-blue armor recipe, it is extremely important to start off with the correct color of a primer based on what you want to be your underlying color. Imagine that the ceramide that the armor is made of is this grey, which will show as the outer paint layers scrape off. The next layer is done by AK Snow Blue, both cold and bright color that we can build the next layers upon. Since the coming layers will be done with contrast paint and wash, which are semi-transparent, it's imperative to have a light layer now that allows the colors to show. It will also work as a sort of highlight for us as we uncover it with alcohol. But before I continue with more acrylics, I apply a layer of slightly thin Goon's Grime. Here on the plastic art I cover the entire area for the sake of showing off how the enamel works. But on a model I would apply it very deliberately, mainly to the recesses. Since I don't want much brown and grime here, I can easily remove and manipulate the Goon's Grime with mineral spirit, which works as a thinner for enamels and oils. Enamels take a long time to fully cure, so I have a lot of time during which I can reactivate the enamel and bend it to my will, so to speak, removing around 80% of what I applied and creating streaks in a dragging motion. This enamel layer will do two things for us. One, it will create some slight variation under the next blue layers, and two, it should make it easier to manipulate the blue, as the acrylic layer will rest on top of dry, but uncured and thus moving enamel. Before you start applying the acrylics onto the enamel though, make sure all the mineral spirit has evaporated completely. You can speed up the process with a hairdryer on medium settings. Around 20 seconds should do. That way you can safely apply the acrylic layer. I use the Space Wolf's grey contrast paint, thinned 2 to 1 part Lamian medium, so I can control how the paint builds up. You can see that it builds up very slowly in the beginning, but at a certain point it gets dark fairly quickly. Now, I have to say that my original plan wasn't to use isopropyl alcohol, but rather just simple water, akin to Dark Ages yellow recipe. But unfortunately, I came to a hiccup of sorts. And what worked for the yellow ink used does not work here, as it seems the contrast paint just behaves differently. Or perhaps it is the fact that I applied it in several layers. Instead of scraping cleanly, it creates these clumps, and that is just not what I want. For this to work, I would need to compromise. Either by applying just a single thin layer, but that would not make the color strong enough, or by changing to a different paint, but that would compromise the color tone, and I really want to use that classical blue-gray. So I changed the reductive approach. Instead of water, I use isopropyl alcohol, using a brush and airbrush cleaning tools. As mentioned, isopropyl alcohol eats away at paint layers and can easily get down to bare plastic, so I use only light movements to be very slow and methodical. The cleaning tools will reveal the inner layers in thin lines, creating scratches and binding into the paint too, creating physical scratches and texture as well. What I suggest doing is trying to just reveal the snow blue layer, and if you happen to dig deeper by accident, you will reveal the grey primer, which is also fine. It will give you crazy variation to weathering of the armor. Normal brush is more of a gentle tool, pushing around the paint layers more cleanly if you just want to reveal the deeper layers. The more pressure and uneven movements you use, the deeper into the layers you dig, revealing the grey primer or even plastic, and the texture will become rougher for it. If your goal is only a slight texture, keep a light hand and work slow. I'm going for a very battle damaged look, so I apply more force and janky movements. After I'm happy with the reductive technique, I add some shadows with Korea green shade. This will also add another tone of blue, more greenish one, which will up the contrast in the places where I apply it and make the surface more interesting. If you want, you can also use alcohol here to add some more scratches into the Korea. Shadows in the recesses would be deepened with Abteilung smoke, black oil paint. The oil can be thinned with mineral spirits to flow better, but the more you thin them, the less opaque the color will be, so it's best to add just a little spirit to help the oil flow off the brush. You can drag the oil to create streaks. Flat brush is best for that, or a softer round brush to burnish and spread it around. The more mineral spirit you use when manipulating the oil, the easier it's to move, but at the same time it's gonna lose some opacity because you are basically diluting it. Like here, on the left, I use a fair amount of white spirit, while also burnishing the streaks with a clean brush, which feathers them into the blue and makes them even less pronounced. Oils are extremely versatile. You can create streaks, add strong or subtle colors, and spattering for mottling. As the oils have a long working time, if you don't like something, you can easily remove and manipulate it with mineral spirits for hours. So far, what we have here is all pretty cold, and a good excuse to break it up with some warm tones is rust. You can use pigments mixed with water for some chalky rusting, and that kind of surface will contrast to the satin finish of the armor, both in color and in finish. The pigment can be feathered with a clean brush once it's dry, and it will give you an orange tint to the surface around. It's also quite safe, as it won't reactivate the oils you are building upon. But be mindful that the oils are still not cured and can be moved if you push into them. But on the other hand, enamel rust effects can also be used, and I usually use several colors of rust to have some natural variation. Just be aware that the enamel will blend with the uncured black oil, the more so if you apply it heavily and manipulate it with a brush on top of the oil. That is not necessarily a bad thing, but something to be aware of. Oil and enamel streak effects can also be thinned with a brush. I usually use a corner of a flat brush just damp with mineral spirit, as that gives me a good control and lets me go in a straight line. And that's about the recipe explained. Now to apply the armor itself. As mentioned, the Gunnsgrime is located mainly to the recesses, and cleaned by around 80% with mineral spirits to not stain the white too much. If you need to shade smaller recesses neatly, you can thin the enamel or oils a fair bit with mineral spirit, and then just slightly touch the model with a loaded brush. The spirit is very flowy and will find its way into the recesses on its own. I make sure to clean it up with more mineral spirits nonetheless though, leaving the enamel almost exclusively in the recesses. Then I continue with the Space Wolf Grey, with isopropyl reductive technique following. But as it appears, I applied one layer too much, and that completely kills the variation, as there is just too much of the contrast paint. Colia green shade, for example, isn't as readable, and it just feels wrong to me. To fix that, we could strip the mini, but we can also simply apply it all again. The good thing it does for you is, when we will use the reductive technique, we have much more leeway of error, as we still have all these layers underneath to uncover before we go to primer or plastic. I wouldn't recommend reapplying this more though, as that would build up the layers and could clog up the details. If you need to start again more than 2 times, you are probably better off stripping the mini entirely and starting from scratch. This time I make sure to apply the correct amount of Space Wolf Grey, 4 to 5 thin layers. This contrast paint seems quite hard to tame, as the sweet spot for it, so it isn't too light or too heavy, is quite narrow. All the steps mentioned here apply: Colia green shade, black oil recesses, etc. I use the oil paint almost straight out of the tube, thinned only with a drop of mineral spirit. That way I can make sure that the recess line I'm painting will be opaque enough and read as black. I don't have to be super neat thanks to using an oil paint, and later can come with just mineral spirits to push the oil into recesses and manipulating it into thinner lines. If after the black oil you feel like there isn't enough contrast, and it got all darkened down, you can add stippled or rough edge highlights with the snow blue acrylic, or even brighten some spots with a bit of off-white oil, like Abteilung Dead Flesh, spreading it around with a clean brush. The oil can of course also be used for edge highlights, as chipping of a different color, and can be left stark or blended in. The other main color I want to focus on is the yellow. The approach to that is going to be a little different, as I don't want the same kind of variation at texture, to differentiate it from the blue in that way also. Primer does not really matter this time around, but neutral or light color will help you build up the yellow faster. Transition from top to bottom, I first apply a few layers of AK Pale Yellow, followed by a Vallejo Yellow ink, and ending with Reichland Flesh Shade. I don't have to worry about being super neat here, and I can relax, as any spattering, spots where there is too much surface tension, or even webbing, where I was overzealous and applied too much paint before drying. This all helps to create mottling, and we can even manipulate it all with alcohol later, and create even more, as we did on the blue armor. This time though, I'm doing far less, keeping the transitions and only roughing up the smoothness of it. I'm not reducing the paint down to primer, only to the yellow. I'm trying to be very random here, avoiding any patterns, so the yellow can read as a paint on a shoulder pad that keeps weathering and scraping when worn on a space marine who moves a lot. Following this, I get some Abteilung Dead Flesh on my brush and rubbed most of it on a paper towel. Then, I apply dots all over the area, so they are spaced out sort of evenly, and then burnishing them with a clean round brush. This will spread the oil evenly, desaturating the colors and making them colder. You can do this multiple times, but I'd be careful not to completely kill the yellow, as we want some warmth to break the entire color pattern of the miniature. If the oil is hard to spread, you can add just a tiny bit of mineral spirit to your clean brush. That will make manipulating the oil much easier. Again, also, if you are not happy with something, any oil can be removed with set mineral spirits. I basically want the yellow to be colder to work with the blue and emphasize the overall mood, but also to keep some warmth to be in contrast and break the scheme up a bit. Some of the spots I create I fill out with chocolate brown, working as the base layer of the ceramite. Make sure not to fill the entirety of these spots though, so there is some of the pale yellow showing on the edges, so they read correctly as rubbed or scratched spots. You can even add more deliberate spots with the pale yellow afterwards. And as the final step, to bring back contrast, we darken the bottom with Agrak Surfshade. Before I move forward, I would just like to shout out our Grimdark challenge, which is a painting competition we run for our community, with prizes and glory to be won. This time, the theme is Forsaken Travelers, and the challenge is running until September 11th. Rules and more info is posted on our website. Also, if you like what we do, please feel free to check out the rest of our website, as we have our biggest sale of the year still happening, with courses, Villainy Inc. Phase 1, and memberships on sale, plus Phase 2 being on pre-order. Your support is what makes this all possible, and we really appreciate it. The third color of the Space Wolf scheme is a red. I'm making a more simplistic approach to it, starting with deep red and then stippling progressively lighter reds on smaller area each time. Very straightforward. I apply 2 layers of each paint, which I dilute 1-to-1 with water, and most of the paint unloaded from a brush into a paper towel, almost as if I was preparing for dry brushing, only wet. Once done with stippling, I unify all the transitions with 2 glazes of Berserker Bloodshade. And then, to add a bit more contrast, I stipple just the lightest color back in. I will also deepen the shadows with black oil later, for even more contrast. As for the leather, cloth and wood, I will go over that in later episodes. For now, I'm moving on to metals. For iron, I start with a black base coat and then dry brush the still wet paint with an unloaded brush, so some of the black paint stays in the recesses. Don't be afraid of leaving the black showing through some parts, like here on the belt I mostly just stipple the metallics, as it will create a mottled pattern and not just a flat coat. Just be careful not to get the metallic pigments on any other surfaces, and if you do, fix them up with acrylics. Do not try it with alcohol. You will just move the metallic pigments all over the place. With Vallejo Steel acting as our mid-tone, I also use Vallejo Silver to bring highlights in the same manner. This is a simple way of creating iron-like metals with depth, especially on things like chainmail, which has a lot of recesses. Having a dark base coat and then brushing over it, leaving some in the recesses, will create deeper shadows than if you just base coated the metal. The bronze parts are done with 3 main colors: Skill 75 Decayed Metal, Victorian Brass, and Dwarven Gold. I felt it was important to choose golden or bronze color here, as it will help break up the blue. Starting with a base coat of decayed metal, I then highlight progressively smaller areas in a similar manner as with the iron, only mixing each 2 paints together 1-to-1 as transitions. So it goes decayed metal, then decayed metal 1-to-1 with Victorian brass, and then pure Victorian brass, and so on. If you struggle on where to put highlights on metals, get a light source above your mini and see where the light reflects. That should help guide you. I work with a pretty thin paint and not a lot loaded in my brush to slowly build up the transitions and contrast, plus to not build up any thick texture. I don't worry about trying for super smooth blends, as I want to see all the different metallic tones show when the light goes over them. The final, smallest highlight of Dwarven Gold is mixed with just a little bit of silver too, to brighten it up even more. After this, I give the metals a deliberate oil wash to unify it. Black for iron and Uptilung Industrial Earth for the bronze. Following with Reductive technique and bringing back just the brightest highlights. It's at this point when I also add shadows with Uptilung smoke to the red, around runes, rivets, and to smaller recesses. If I didn't, they would be lacking a huge amount of definition. Darker recesses help materials stand out and be readable from the rest, so it's not just a blob. These final recess shadings can also be done with acrylics. You just have to be more careful, as they are not as forgiving as oils are. But even those you can still carefully remove with isopropyl alcohol if you mess up. I don't have to be extremely neat. Again, everything can be cleaned and moved thanks to using an oil over acrylics. Also, some of the recesses I don't just shade cleanly. I feather them into transition with a clean brush, like on the shield and the red shoulder pad. And after I'm done with the reductive technique and removing some of the oil wash from the metals, I come back with brightest highlights and reintroduce them back, so there is that nice metallic sheen that draws the eye. The black parts of armor, where the arms and legs bend, are coated with a simple black. But they are a hugely important piece that will help us with the surface finish variation. That is an aspect of the Grimdark style that gets often omitted, yet it is extremely important, one of the cornerstones. See, the entire paint scheme is thought out. Little additions like the skulls and supporting colors like the yellow and red and even the rust are here to break up the cold blue with some warmth. But color is not the only way to break up a scheme and make it more interesting. Surface finish variation is basically how light interacts with materials. Most of the armor is satin, so if everything else is satin, there just wouldn't be enough variation and it would look strange. Because of that, the black parts are painted with satin varnish and highlighted with gloss varnish, representing reflective rubber. The cloth and rust are very matte, metal highlights reflective, etc. It's about having variation of finishes next to each other, so there is a lot of visual interest. A good way to do this is to see how materials you are trying to paint reflect light in reality, what finish they have, and rendering that onto miniatures. Most materials have three basic finishes: matte, satin, or glossy. Different paints and different brands have their own finishes by nature, but we can also either reinforce or change them with varnishes after. As the last step, I just add some oxidization to the bronze with Uptilung Faded Green, mixed with a tiny bit of copper oxide. I'm aware that the copper oxide is unfortunately discontinued, but if you can get an older tube from somewhere, I'd recommend trying to get Uptilung Light Blue or similar. If they discontinue the best tones, we will have to mix them together ourselves. I want the bronze weathering to be mainly green, with just a touch of blue, because if it was mostly blue, it would just look like the armor, which wouldn't simply work and blend together. This is also a way to bring in another color, and it wouldn't make sense for the bronze to be pristine when everything else is weathered. And the first reimagined Space Wolf is done, using a different approach to who they are, but keeping to the classical colors so they are readable as Space Wolves. Look at how colorful he is, yet still reading very grim, with a ton of variation in armor texture. This is the first episode of a new Space Wolf course done by yours truly, with rest of the episodes being uploaded to our website and here under YouTube memberships. I will show you how to paint varied, easy leather, cloth, wood, how to make lifelike hair, frozen bases, and of course, how to apply real fur, because it wouldn't be something done by me if I didn't choose to paint something with fur. I hope you enjoyed my little venture into the 40k universe and my take on Space Wolves, and perhaps even learned something you can use on your own miniatures. This has been Echoes of Vermin, and you have been watching the Grimdark Compendium. Take care, and thank you.